If you've ever wondered whether your mindset could influence your healing and health, this episode will show you what real remission stories in neuroscience actually reveal and provide you with the tools you need to activate a healing mindset today. You've been told it's incurable, but here at Renegade Remission, we believe in rewriting the story. If you're facing a terminal or chronic illness, you are not alone. I'm Eleni Welch, certified nutritionist, and each week I share healing strategies and remission stories to help you take control of your health, feel better, and rediscover hope. Welcome back to Renegade Remission. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how expectation and belief measurably influence immune signaling and inflammation, learn what the placebo effect actually proves about healing biology, and hear a documented remission survivor story in which a profound inner shift coincided with unexpected physical improvement. Stay with me until the end because I'll give you simple, pressure-free practices that support your brain's healing pathways without requiring forced positivity or denial. In previous episodes, we've explored how trauma, suppressed emotions, and nervous system regulation influence inflammation and immune balance. That conversation has centered on stress, physiology, and safety. Today we're going one step further into a more specific question. Can what you expect, believe, or imagine about your healing influence what happens next? This is an emotionally loaded question. Many people living with chronic or terminal illness fear that if their disease progresses, it must mean they didn't believe hard enough. Others feel angry at the suggestion that mindset plays any role at all because it's dismissive to them. So let's begin with some clarity. Your thoughts did not cause your illness. Your belief system is not responsible for whether you live or die, and no one heals simply by thinking positively. But the brain is not separate from the immune system. It is not separate from inflammation, and it is not separate from how the body responds to treatment. What we've seen in early research is that expectation influences biology in measurable ways. And when you look up both remission narratives and neuroscience, the answer becomes far more hopeful than most people realize. Before we unpack the research, I want to share a real survivor story documented in Kelly Turner's Radical Remission research database. This was not a randomized control trial. It's a documented interview with a long-term cancer survivor whose case defied medical expectation. Kelly Turner documents the story of a woman diagnosed with advanced cancer who was told her prognosis was poor and that conventional treatment options were limited. According to that interview, she initially spiraled into fear and despair, spending weeks convinced that decline was inevitable. Her body responded accordingly. She described worsening fatigue, sleeplessness, and constant anxiety. The turning point did not begin with a new drug or a dramatic external intervention. It began when she recognized that she was living every day in a state of catastrophic expectation. She realized she had mentally rehearsed decline so many times that her entire nervous system was constantly braced for it. With support, she began deliberately shifting her internal narrative, not by denying reality, but creating space for possibility. She immersed herself in stories of unexpected recoveries. She practiced daily visualization, imagining her immune system functioning effectively. She engaged in meditation that helped her feel calm and safe, even while undergoing treatment. She described moving from waiting to die to actively participating in healing. Over time, something changed. Her scans stabilized, then showed improvement. Her oncologist expressed surprise at her response trajectory. She continued medical care, but her disease progression did not follow the statistical pattern she had been given. Years later, she was still alive and well beyond her original prognosis window. She did not claim that mindset alone healed her. She made nutritional and lifestyle changes as well. But when asked what felt most transformative, she consistently returned to the moment she stopped rehearsing decline and began rehearsing possibility. Her story highlights a pattern seen repeatedly in remission interviews. When expectation shifts from inevitability to possibility, physiology often shifts too. One of the most important discoveries in neuroscience over the past 2 decades is that the brain is not simply reacting to reality, it is actually constantly predicting it. Researchers sometimes call this the predictive processing model of the brain. Your nervous system continuously forecasts what is likely to happen next and adjusts physiology accordingly. If the brain predicts danger or decline, stress pathways activate, heart rate increases, inflammatory signaling rises, cortisol shifts, and energy is diverted towards survival. If the brain predicts safety or improvement, different systems come online. Digestion improves, immune precision increases, and repair processes become more accessible. Studies using functional MRI show that expectation alone can alter activity in regions like the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and insula, areas directly involved in pain regulation, immune signaling, and autonomic balance. In other words, expectation is not an abstract psychological idea, it's a neurological input that shapes the body's baseline state moment by moment. This does not mean that belief overrides disease biology, but it does mean that the brain's predictions help set the physiological tone in which healing either struggles or becomes more possible. Nothing is better proof that our mind influences physiology than the placebo effect. The placebo effect is one of the strongest demonstrations that expectation produces measurable biological change. In clinical trials, placebo responses are not rare. In fact, they're often substantial. Across many conditions, approximately 30 to 40% of patients experience measurable improvement on placebo alone. And in some areas, such as pain disorders or depression, response rates can exceed 50 to 60%. Research by neuroscientist Fabrizio Benedetti shows that placebo responses are accompanied by specific biochemical events. When people believe they are receiving effective treatment, the brain releases endogenous opioids and dopamine, activates endocannabinoid pathways, and reduces activity in pain processing regions. These changes are measurable with neuroimaging and biochemical assays. Even immune responses can shift. In conditioning experiments, participants given placebo treatments associated with immune-modulating drugs showed altered immune markers simply through expecting that the treatment would work. Equally important is the nocebo effect, negative expectation worsening symptoms. Studies show that when patients expect side effects, they experience them more frequently, even when receiving inactive treatments. This has been demonstrated in trials where patients are given placebo chemotherapy, and even though they're not actually receiving chemotherapy, they still lose their hair because they expect to. This highlights something powerful. Expectation doesn't create illness, but it can amplify or dampen biological responses already in motion. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's lifelong ability to rewire itself based on repeated experience. This includes not only physical experiences, but also emotional and imagined ones. Brain imaging studies show that visualization activates many of the same neural networks as real-world action. Athletes, musicians, and stroke rehabilitation programs all use mental rehearsal because it produces measurable changes in neural circuitry. In the context of illness, repeated thought patterns, whether they're catastrophic or hopeful, strengthen corresponding neural pathways. Chronic fear reinforces threat circuits and sympathetic activation, whereas practices that cultivate calm, expectation, safety, hope, or possibility strengthen networks associated with parasympathetic regulation and emotional resilience. Research in chronic pain and anxiety demonstrates that cognitive training and visualization practices can reduce symptom intensity and alter brain connectivity patterns over time. These changes correlate with decreased inflammatory signaling and improved stress hormone regulation. And one of the most powerful and often overlooked mechanisms is actually behavioral. The idea is that belief influences action, and action influences biology. Meta-analyses in health and psychology show that individuals with greater perceived hope or expectancy of improvement are more likely to adhere to treatment protocols, engage in movement, prioritize sleep, maintain supportive relationships, and avoid harmful coping patterns. These behavioral differences are not minor. They correlate with measurable differences in inflammation, metabolic stability, and disease progression. For example, studies on cardiac rehabilitation show significantly higher survival rates among patients who believe recovery is possible, largely because they engage more consistently in recommended lifestyle behaviors. Similar patterns appear across cancer and survivorship research, chronic pain recovery, and autoimmune disease management. Expectation is therefore not just an internal state, It's a catalyst for behaviors that shape the internal environment of healing. You don't need unwavering belief, you don't need to deny fear, but gently widening the range of what feels possible can influence the internal terrain in which healing occurs. Here are some practical action steps you can engage in today to support your expectation in a healthy way without pressure. Instead of trying to force positivity, begin with curiosity. Ask yourself, is it possible that my body could respond better than expected? Even that question introduces cognitive flexibility. Next, experiment with brief visualization. Imagine your treatment working as intended. Picture inflammation cooling or immune cells functioning effectively. This kind of thinking acts as a rehearsal for neural circuits, creating stronger pathways of affirmation and optimism and decreasing pathways that focus on worst-case scenarios. The third thing you can do is adopt believable language. Try, my biology is responsive, or change is possible even if I don't know how. It's important that what you're saying to yourself is believable because believability is key to engaging neuroplastic change. Fourth, limit catastrophic and worst-case scenario rehearsal. When your mind jumps to worst-case scenarios, just call it out, gently and without judgment, because awareness will reduce that sympathetic escalation. And finally, surround yourself with stories of possibility. The brain learns from narrative exposure. This podcast is a fantastic place to start. Every week I share documented stories of unexpected survival and remission. Episode 46, titled When Healing Happens Anyway, Real Stories of People Who Defied Terminal Diagnoses, is a great episode for you to listen to. Your mind cannot guarantee remission, but it does actively participate in shaping the biological conditions where remission becomes more or less possible. The brain is not separate from the immune system. It is in constant conversation with it. You do not need to have perfect thoughts. You do not need constant optimism. You simply need moments where expectation softens from inevitability to possibility. And sometimes that shift is enough to change the direction of your story. In upcoming episodes, I'll continue sharing nutrition, lifestyle, and mind-body changes that can influence your ability to heal. So stay tuned for those episodes. And as always, go be renegades.